Hello everyone, my name is Susan Morales and my YouTube channel explores what it means to follow Jesus in an everyday kind of way. Today I want to talk about how we have a lot of traditions within Christianity and a lot of traditions in our country, the United States of America. And I just want to talk about and think through those things. First, if you haven't already, please subscribe to my YouTube channel for more videos, and it will help my channel if you remember to like this video. So first, I want to share with you an experience I had this Sunday. I was actually at my church, and I completely forgot that it was the first Sunday of the month, which is when our church does communion. For those that don't know, communion is something that we do that's symbolic in memory of what Jesus did with his disciples right before he was crucified. So he broke bread, and everyone, had some of the bread, and that was symbolic of how his body was going to be broken. His body was going to be broken for our healing, and wine was symbolic of how he was going to pour out his blood. His blood would be the price that was shed for our forgiveness, the forgiveness of our sins. And Jesus said for us to do this in remembrance of him. So throughout Christianity, there have been many different ways that people have done communion. And one of the traditions today is usually churches do this at the beginning of the month, once a month. There are other churches that actually do this every Sunday, and it just depends on what beliefs your particular Christian church holds to. So this last Sunday, I was actually not in the main church building, but I was with my kids in their classroom. And I got home and I told my husband, oh my gosh, I completely forgot that today was communion, because I really look forward to that and I don't like to skip it. So my husband had just brought us lunch, and he had served himself a glass of wine, and he had breadsticks. And so he's like, well, why don't we do it right now, because I also forgot to take communion. He's a musician at church and he played that Sunday, so I guess it happens that he forgot because he was busy playing music. So he gave me a little piece of his bread, and I just I said it for us, just what the bread symbolized, and then he gave me his cup, and I took a sip, and also I mentally and out loud said what the wine symbolized, and that got me thinking. Well, there's a tradition at our church and many churches, where we don't actually drink wine, but we have these little cups of grape juice and some little, a little cracker thing on the top that you eat it. And I posted a poll on my Twitter account asking about this. So 2 days ago, I asked, would you prefer a small sip of actual wine during communion? Please explain why in the comments. And 53% said yes. So one person said, wine is a very special drink, the blood of grapes. Some have called it. To me, it's more symbolic to have a small sip. Another person wrote, the wine of the Bible is heavily diluted. Okay, another person wrote, wine is usually gross. Grape juice tastes good. Also, people below 21 also take communion, because in our country, you have to be 21 to drink alcohol. So someone recommended a link by Dan Wallace, an article on wine and the Bible, and I'll attach that link in the description if you're interested in reading it. He wrote, Jesus used wine, and so did basically all of Christendom until the late 1800s, when Welch's grape juice was marketed to churches. Also, port actually tastes good. Okay, so very interesting. Another person wrote, because I like wine. And someone else wrote, there may be recovering alcoholics in the congregation, so I voted no. So here we have so much liberty, so much freedom with regards to the decisions we make today. Because something that many people might not actually know is that the Bible was written for us, but not to us. And what that means is that if there is something written in a book of the Bible, it does not necessarily mean that that applies to us here today, thousands of years later. And so we have to study what the Bible teaches, right, in that context, in that situation. And then we have to find what application we can get from that. And so that's pretty much why we have so many different traditions when it comes to communion. So here are my thoughts, thinking through communion. It would be nice to actually follow the tradition that the early Christians had, which was to drink actual wine. And that's not to say to drink a whole lot, but just something small, symbolic, because I feel it would be a nice connection to the past. It unites us, you know? And then I got to thinking about, well, what about the younger people in the church? Well, since we have these laws, right, in our country, then grape juice might be a good option to serve as well for those people. Or, for example, the recovering alcoholics, they would be responsible enough and discipled, by the church, hopefully, so that they would not fall into that sin. So they could choose, the grape juice instead. And I was just thinking, well, if the early church did that with wine, then it seems like there wasn't necessarily a helicopter church mentality. I mean, there is a passage in the Bible that says that people were getting drunk off of the wine and that there were severe consequences for those people. So it seems like God took it upon himself to, correct bad behavior. And so we can learn from them. But I do think that personally, it was really interesting and really nice to be able to drink an actual sip of wine for the first time in my own, at home communion experience. Let's move on to traditions that we have in our country. And then we'll talk a little bit more about, the traditions in our church as well. So I read a response to a tweet by a well-known YouTuber. So this YouTuber is Allie Beth Stuckey, and she wrote a response to this initial tweet by Lecrae. So Lecrae wrote, "A Christian school in Atlanta is forcing kids to recite the pledge to the American flag or they can't attend. Imagine Jesus saying, 'Honor the Roman creed or you can't follow me.'" And then Allie wrote, "Out of all the absolute filth I see coming out of schools today, the sexual depravity, the gender confusion, the racial resentment, and the overt undermining of parental rights, I've got to say this is very low on my list of concerns." And from, my vantage point, it seems like there's a lot of Christians that really don't like the things that Lecrae says sometimes on his Twitter. And it just seems like this has a hint of that on Allie's part. But, I wrote on my Twitter a response to her. I said, "He's right, though. There's a line between our allegiance to God and our country's traditions." So let's look at Lecrae's real quick. "A Christian school in Atlanta is forcing kids to recite the pledge to the American flag or they can't attend." So this is a requirement to attend a Christian school. When I went to public school, elementary, from the beginning, kindergarten, we had to recite the Pledge of Allegiance every morning. And this is a tradition in our country. Our country has wanted to spread patriotism, and they've started adding the Pledge of Allegiance in significant events, significant gatherings, and sports, and all of this. So this is, in fact, a tradition. And behind that is that if you get people to recite the Pledge of Allegiance often, then people will be, committed to your country and will be patriots. So I'm not too sure about that. I homeschool my kids and I don't make them say the Pledge of Allegiance every day because I feel like there's other ways to promote patriotism in our country, and I don't believe that we should, like what they do in schools, just paint everything, and to make it look like our country is an angel. And then you get to college and then you're like, whoa, they lied to you, like look at all the bad stuff that our country did. So I think it's important to teach our kids that our country is not perfect and that we have a history of doing a lot of bad choices, and that thank God we don't do those things anymore, or there's still room for improvement here and there. So just a realistic approach. And I think there's a hint of the whole protesting the Pledge of Allegiance in sports events here. So I'm not sure if that's what Lecrae was getting at. So I think what Lecrae is really getting at is that if you are a Christian school, you shouldn't let your tradition, your patriotism get in the way of allowing students to come and learn about Jesus. As important as your political views are, and you may feel that your Christianity influences your views on politics, you still have to keep in mind that that is a tradition. And obviously people will say, well, it's a private school and they get to decide what they want, like what they want to require for you to get in. But I think it's good pushback that if you're a Christian, Christians should be vocal about when we see that there are some things that are not consistent with the Bible, that we should call those things out. And so he gave that example of, imagine Jesus saying, honor the Roman creed, or you can't follow me. So the Roman creed, because, Jesus lived when the Romans were in charge, it is kind of a bit of a stretch to say that, because at the end of the day, Jesus did tell his followers to give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's. So he was very focused on his kingdom, the kingdom he was bringing to us. And, his kingdom greater than the Romans, right? But at the same time, Jesus did have, like, a respect, a desire not to, like, insult, I guess. When they asked him about taxes, and then Jesus sent Peter to go collect some money from a fish. And so that conversation happened. So there's a lot to be said about how we reach a point where we don't necessarily have to go along with whatever our country tells us we need to do when it conflicts with the main kingdom, which is the kingdom of God. And so we don't necessarily have to do everything that our country would require of us outside of like a Christian setting. For example, if the government requires public schools to, say the Pledge of Allegiance, that does not necessarily mean that we as Christian schools, Christian private schools, have to require that of our children. There's also this thing that in public school, there are some permissions for children with different religions to not have to stand up and pledge allegiance to our country, and that those religions are respected. So I wonder if Christians are overreacting when people want to protest by not saying the Pledge of Allegiance. I think that we conflate our politics with our Christian faith, and it's unfortunate. So I think there is some type of liberty when it comes to Christians and having to say the Pledge of Allegiance. For example, this school, I feel like they are conflating their political views with their religion, Christianity. And I think it's worth pushing back. And then I didn't see that Allie necessarily said that that's not important, but she did say it's low on her list of concerns. And she kind of took an opportunity of saying all the bad stuff that's going on in schools, one of them being the racial resentment. So that's something that she personally feels and observes, how there's so much hatred towards white people by some educators and people that are within the school system right now. The things that they are teaching, she has concerns about those things. But I don't think we should ignore Lecrae's main point that, Christians should remember that we do have traditions, like saying the Pledge of Allegiance in schools. That's a tradition. It's not a mandate by God, right? And I don't think we should mandate students to have to say the Pledge of Allegiance in order, like he said, to come to a Christian school and learn about God. That's the main priority, right? The next thing, sure, if patriotism is something you want to teach in your school, then that should be second. But it shouldn't be a prerequisite. I don't want to undermine Allie's concerns, kind of like I feel like she does undermine Lecrae's concerns, and a lot of Christians did when they reacted to his tweet. And so, like, my main point, coming back to the traditions that we follow within Christianity, like we talked about the communion, I think that we need to be mindful that it's okay to make traditions, right? We do it all the time. For example, Christmas time is coming up. Some people like to celebrate Halloween. That's coming up right around the corner. So there's a lot of traditions that people just kind of follow without thinking too much about it. And it's enjoyable to be able to do the same thing every year. And I think we do that within Christianity as well. We kind of just go along with the traditions that we have, and sometimes we don't really think too deeply about them. We don't really want to rock the boat, so we just kind of go with it. And I think that's fine, but we should know why we do the things that we do, and we should be mindful of that. We are living in this particular time of history. This is our context, and this is how we are doing our best to follow Jesus in the time and place that we live in. But we shouldn't elevate our traditions to be the same as like God's commands. We should just be mindful of, hey, these are our traditions, and I've thought them through, and I don't see anything in conflict with what the Bible teaches. Kind of like how Jesus pointed out how the Pharisees elevated their own traditions to the law of God, and how that even they like came at Jesus saying, hey, why don't you follow the traditions, and he pushed back. Because of your traditions, you're actually making like loopholes to not following God's commands, like honoring your father and your mother. And he pushed back on how like they would say, well, I dedicated a certain amount of money to God, so I'm sorry, I can't help you, mother and father, with money. So it's very important for us to recognize, hey, this is a tradition. Is it a good thing for me to follow this tradition? Do I have to require all Christians to follow my tradition? And I think there's more liberty than what a lot of Christians are willing to acknowledge and grant to other people. If you like this video, again, please remember to like and leave me a comment. Share your thoughts in the comment section below. And please remember to subscribe if you haven't already. Bye.